Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Architect Tomorrow. I'm really privileged to be joined by Darryl and Selena. These are two people that I admire massively and have had lots of deep, meaningful conversations relating to architecture and the future of technology and things like that. So it's long overdue that the pair of them appeared on the podcast. And we've been discussing a bunch of things about how crazy the sort of digital transformation, AI fueled era that we're living in is kind of how it's playing out. So I was really keen to get them on the podcast. So Selena, perhaps you could kick us off with some introductions.
Sure. Thanks, Oliver. So happy to be here. I um I think it's so fun to be here with Darryl as well, as we got connected across the world through the architecture community. So this is an extra special treat to have us all together. So I'm an attorney by trade and have come to business and also a certified business architect. I came to this field by collaborating with architects on digital transformation for many years and have been exploring in quite a bit of depth the idea of using architecture in governance, both civically and organizationally.
Amazing, and I look forward to getting into some of that because I think that perspective gives you a very it just gives you a nice, unique kind of viewpoint on things, which is why I love having chats with you. But Darryl, welcome, and I know we've done many things together, like some of the ISA conferences and various things. But it's great to have you on Architect Tomorrow. Perhaps you could introduce yourself for the audience.
Sure, thanks, Oliver. Yeah, and it's great to be talking to my two favorite people in the world. And we are literally all over the world. I'm in Perth in Western Australia, so we've got the US and the UK covered as well. So it's fantastic. I work in the enterprise architecture space. I have a focus on trying to maintain a human focus when looking at how organisations change, and yeah, I do a few other things in the community to try and help build a stronger profession.
I think you're being very modest there. You're pretty, from my perspective, you seem very influential in your part of the world in Australia. And yeah, thanks for making the point. Like we are literally, I think I'm at midday. I don't know, you're like near the end of the evening, night, and then Selena, it's morning for you. So yeah, we found like a window within the time zones that kind of almost work for you two. Work fine for me, but I think the two of you have been very kind to flex your schedules to fit this in. So thank you.
We are almost architecting tomorrow from where I'm sitting, so
Amazing.
that's
Well
pretty good.
done, Daryl. Well done.
Very good. And the clock behind you in your background isn't the real time, is it? What time is it there?
It is not. It is not. It's 8 p.m. here.
All right. Okay. Okay. It's not too bad. And then for you, Selena, it's like some like pre-breakfast time or
7 a.m. pre-breakfast,
okay.
pre-coffee.
All
So if
right.
my
All right.
cylinders don't fire, I apologize.
No worries. All right. Well, look, let's get into this because there's so much to talk about, right? I think when we were preparing for this conversation, there's so many different topics and angles. But I just to let everyone know what we plan to cover. We're going to talk a lot about the sort of craziness of the current sort of technology fueled kind of craziness it feels like we're in at times, or at least there's the perception of that because of the stories we read and the things we hear. But also, I think what I'd love to do is take a little bit of a further look forward. I think Architect Tomorrow, one of the things I pride myself on with the channel and the community is that we spend some time not getting too caught up in the here and now and actually go, hang on, if we're here now, if we're here at A, what does B look like? What is C then likely to look like, and so on and so forth. And I think that's some of the most valuable conversations we can have because there is an awful lot of people talking about trying to sell the here and now at the expense, I think, of what's potentially coming down the line. And there's a bunch of things we'll put in the show notes for people to because all of us I think have written various things on topics related to this. But perhaps we should start with the kind of current hype because it just does feel fairly crazy. It almost feels like the political playbook is now playing into the technology sort of landscape, right? In that I don't know whether it's a case of just fire out so many stories, that you kind of lose track of some of the reality because you're just constantly being distracted by the next one. Or Yeah, I mean, like, I mean, like, Darryl, you were talking about the sort of Accenture story. So I don't know if we should start there, but equally, there's the sort of numbers that have been floating around, like how economically unsustainable this is. But maybe let's start, Darryl, with like the Accenture story.
Yeah, if you look at, I mean, there is the recent sort of layoffs from Accenture, and that was sort of positioned in the market as them looking at um, uh, increased capabilities through the use of AI. But there's certainly lots of conjecture about other reasons why that might be occurring. But I suppose what gets lost in that story is that there's 11,000 people who don't have a job tomorrow. And what does that mean? And why doesn't that register in the conversations that go alongside it? I think that's a significant problem in the way that we're currently having these conversations. But if you also look at something like the initiative from the US government, which is $500 billion being invested into the development of AI capabilities, that's is substantially bigger than some countries'
Mm,
GDP. So,
hmm.
and that's just one aspect of of the industry. And I look for some justification in terms of the return on that value, and I genuinely struggle to find it, despite how tremendously clever the technology is in terms of its capability. But I'm not quite sure what the business case is for some of these things.
Yeah, I recently posted about the use cases and the revenue that's flowing off the back of those use cases. The one that a lot of people talk about is software development, right? In helping programmers write code. There's a stat that suggests that 29%, for example, of Copilot code generations get accepted. There's a whole load of detailed analysis and then how long that code stays in the code base. So, but that at the moment, I think, is sort of a few billions worth of revenue. But there's the Bain report and the Deutsche Bank report and various other things out there, which we'll link to in the notes, which suggests that these things need to be generating about 2 trillion worth of revenue by 2030. It's just staggering numbers. And I sort of thought, you know what, I'm going to sort of assess this against the broader cloud computing market. And I think my numbers I came up with were that the whole of cloud computing is worth something like 500 billion, or not even that. I think like 100 to 200 billion. So it's like an order of magnitude more. Now, I guess if you're really all in on this technology, you might try and persuade people that, there is enough value there, that this is going to be fully transformational and it's going to unlock value. And I think there's a McKinsey report which suggests that there's 4.4 trillion of potential revenue and this, that, and the other. But it just does feel very hand wavy. And when at the moment, we can only see certain sort of value. But Selena, you're obviously in the US and you probably get a better tapped in, hopefully, to the sort of headlines and the rhetoric around Stargate and the investments. And yeah, where's your sort of head on the things that you're hearing and reading about the sort of size of the investment versus the returns?
Oh, my head pings around constantly about it, but it's tremendously worrisome, right? Like if we take a step back and we look at the dominant narratives, including within our community, about the possibilities of AI, and people are kind of talking about it like so many of these capabilities are a foregone conclusion, and like agentic AI is just like, it's here, and we just, plug and architect correctly, and we'll have some solutions. But almost all of the narrative that we see in the public is based on large language models. OpenAI, the big companies, coming at us with large language models. And large language models are very limited in
Mm,
what they can do. They're so fun, and I love using them, and the pattern matching, it's incredible. I think that there's tremendous value in decision support with them, but that isn't how people are using them. It's talking so much about automation, replacing jobs, and I don't think that we're at a place where we even have the capabilities to do that. So to me, that is a very instructive piece of the bubble. I mean, when you think about, like, look at our older architecture work where we're relying on RPA and regular, algorithmic work in business. And we weren't able to get a lot of traction on that anyway, because breaking down complex tasks into logic that can be executed over time is really challenging. And
mm.
And LLMs break down in complexity over time and they drift and all of these things that need to be managed on the tail end that isn't getting anything in the hype. So like, what do we do when you have like the entire technology complex talking about this technology as if it's going to solve all of our business problems, but we simultaneously don't have the capabilities to do that. And there's some promising tech out there. I don't mean to say that.
Yep.
But that is like to me, we're like, okay, the financials don't make sense. The narrative doesn't make sense. And we're all in this new space where we're buying into a lot of the narratives because we don't have the language to really, and proof points to really, really talk about it smartly, you know?
Yeah, it's and it's difficult, isn't it? Because on the one hand, you're right. There is a lot of hype, and potentially this is the next sort of blockchain, which people kind of thought was going to solve, world hunger, and then it obviously ended up not having as many use cases. But then equally, there's the other camp that suggests, well, we're just seeing the first sort of parts of this story, and I totally agree with you. I think large language models have some amazing applications, but they are going to be quite limiting. There's Jan LeCun talking about worldview models and various things like that. And then there's part of me that's like, well, actually, is this just the industry trying to sort of spin us on this sort of story that, oh, don't value it on what's today's capabilities, value it on the potential tomorrow. But the trouble is that reality doesn't mesh with that. So at some point, my feeling is the air has to come out of this bubble, and my hope is that it comes out in a sort of managed, controlled way, not in a way that sort of takes down a large part of the tech sector. So yeah, but it is really tricky to navigate, I think, because there is potential in certain use cases for large language models. There is massive amounts of augmentation potential. So I feel like this is somewhere at the moment between an improved spelling and grammar checker, like on steroids, like helps you refine your writing, towards something like a slightly misinformed intern that can do a bunch of research for you, but you need to like properly assess what it comes back with. That for me feels like fairly proven capability. But both of those things are largely they're going to help an individual do their job better. I totally agree with you, Selena. Like the full-on sort of replacement feels like a smokescreen for businesses to be able to just make some difficult choices about their business and go, well, it's AI. Darryl, are you sort of seeing that in your part of the world, like AI just being blamed as sort of, the thing that's, a useful excuse for layoffs?
Yeah, definitely. And I do look at things like, I can't for the life of me remember which CEO, tech bro it was that said this. I think it was the Anthropic CEO who said that by the end of this year, I think it was, effectively all coding would be done by AIs. And I can tell you that I used to work in the banking industry, and I cannot for the life of me see how anybody would let loose an AI in an environment running 40-year-old COBOL systems on mainframes. That's not going to happen. So the built environment and the business cases required to support that activity don't stack up.
Hmm.
And so there is a lot of hype that is tremendously disconnected from the reality of the world we live in.
So on that specific quote, I think he was actually saying 99%, which lets him kind of get away out of jail free slightly. And I think the reason he was saying that is he sees a huge amount of vibe code being the predominant, like the most code will be like vibe code, people just throwing together prototypes or just sort of cooking something up, which will massively dwarf the code that is production ready and in enterprises and so on. It's just there's going to be a lot more code. So I think he was very crafty in how he positioned that. But I agree. But I also see massive potential for looking at legacy code bases where you have a lack of skills, and not necessarily to like change the code, but like to give you a business requirement spec. It's like take this COBOL code base and give me a business requirement spec of that, which then a human reviews and then decides what to do with. Maybe tinkers it, and then potentially in the future then gets an AI platform to help perhaps create the code. More realistically, I think kicks off a project, given the sorts of applications you're talking about, Darryl, where it's messy, it's like you've got lots of existing systems to talk to, data integrations and so on. The brownfield use cases where you've got the enterprise mess of people, process, existing technology. I totally think that space is really, really hard for this to crack. I think creating some marketing sort of front end thing, very straightforward, CRUD, create, read, update, delete type functionality, tried and tested stuff. Yeah, it's going to knock it out of the park because it's just rinsing and repeating a load of code that it's been trained on. But this
Yeah.
messy reality of most enterprises, I think, is where these things are. The reality is just hard to unpick, right?
Yeah, and it's more than the technical challenge.
Mm-hmm.
It's how you could convince the executives that that is the number one priority to dedicate their resource to. And resources are always finite.
Yeah.
You can't do everything, and you can't do everything right now, as much as that's what most project plans look like. You can't do everything. So, how do you prioritize that when you've got changing customer expectations, you've got regulatory changes, you've got all manner of issues already in your organization, and suddenly you need to redirect all of that effort to generating descriptions of what the COBOL systems are doing, and then handing them off to projects or standing up projects to hand this stuff off to recode the system. I'm not sure that makes any sense from a business perspective in my mind. So, you
Oh yeah,
know,
there's got to be a business case for, because that
that's
COBOL
right.
system might be perfectly fine, right? And you might not need to touch it. But if you do have a business problem that requires you to go and look at old legacy code, but you're right, we are putting the technology before. It's like just because we can doesn't mean we should. Like, is there a business rationale for doing it? I totally agree with you.
Well,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
really
yeah.
even make rational choices on our business cases, because I can make a huge case that the infrastructure at so many companies is inefficient to be able to support AI. Like just data fragmentation on its own is a huge project, but it is not anything that they get splashy value from the street and the quarterly returns. So like finding executives to really dig in and then stick with the really long and hard work as priorities change and as people change jobs and as power dynamics shift. It's really a challenge to keep these exceptionally important foundational projects going and aligned. You get a new CTO and they halt everything. It causes such havoc, and it delays progress for years in many cases. So I think just framing it around the business case, it leaves something exceptionally important about the decision-making processes and the jagged adoption curves that we see that we need to talk more about.
So I
And
guess,
more so
hang on.
than not just the business case for that work, but prioritizing it against all of the other demands of the business, I think is more my point.
And
Yeah.
that's possibly what's explaining this revenue gap, right? Is that yes, the tech companies have put out all these things, which let's face it, are largely consumer driven. Like ChatGPT was like a consumer adopted thing. Um, I guess where some organizations then go is, oh, this is like the next mobile or the next thing that we now need to make sure that we're on top of. And of course, there is potentially game changing potential, which longer term, which we can talk about in a bit. And so I guess it's this sort of tension, isn't it, between not wanting to be left behind and FOMO, which is, let's face it, isn't entirely irrational. Like organizations that didn't time their transformation to e-commerce right. There's a whole load of examples, isn't there? Like Amazon started by eating up the book market, but then went on to sell a whole bunch of other things. There's a whole load of industries that we could kind of go and look at what's had their Kodak moment because they didn't digitize. So I guess some of this fear is based on some real world, examples of where people didn't judge things correctly. But it feels like, yeah, this you need to keep a sane head, and I think timing for me is like one of the most important things. Is like, does it make sense for you right now, or does it make sense to sort of pause, reflect, see what's going on in the market when are things mature? Because it does just feel like there is so much happening and so much potentially coming around the corner that actually it's almost worth waiting. But the trouble is, you wait too long and you potentially, so it's this balance, isn't it? Of when do you move and when do you sit and wait? I mean, Selena, I don't know if you have sort of thoughts on how organizations can kind of, frame that and think about that.
I mean, the way that I frame it and think about it, and that I wish more organizations did, like I get the FOMO. This
Yeah.
technology, when I originally, so I took a step back from corporate America because like I see all of this potential in AI, and I like needed to reset. I felt like the way that my profession was practiced was not really fit for this moment. So I like went in thinking that the world was just going to pass me by, to learn as much as I can as quickly as I can. But that didn't happen. I learned a lot. It was a great exercise. But so I think that the immediacy is important, but then the slow deliberation, the hard work of building the models, the hard work of figuring out what it means for your industry, looking at second and third order concepts and doing some serious futuring work around the ecosystem of your business is important for everybody. So like I think that if you and actually there's a great book that just came out, Reshuffle, which is really
Okay.
interesting. And the idea that I agree with as a systems practitioner, look at the entire ecosystem that you're in and start to, leave options open to yourself about how you can move through this and make sure that you're structured to even be able to hear the signals, the truthy signals from the market, to be able to time them correctly. And that's what architecture is so amazing, right? This like long-term, short-term balance and scaffolding to move as you want to. That's like the beauty of it.
Ecosystem architecture has come up time and time again on this podcast, and I think it's this. I genuinely think it's where the enterprise architect sort of role needs to shift to. It's like stop just looking within your interior boundaries and think about what the market looks like, what the competitors look like, what your potential partners look like. Um, because for me, it's that sort of thinking, and that you're right. I think Selena, this requires like proper analysis and the trouble is that's not as exciting as someone saying, "Oh, we're going to run out a bunch of co-pilots and it's going to, revolutionize our bottom line or whatever." It's not sexy and exciting, but actually, this is the work that I think the architecture function should be championing. I totally agree with you. Like, let's look at the trade-off. Let's look at the risks of us not doing anything yet, but like thinking about this properly. And yeah, maybe there's some no-brainers like we will just give people a properly governed, secured platform to improve their productivity. That for me, and it feels like a lot of organizations have just done that, right? But I just don't think there's the return on investment that the tech companies are sort of projecting just based on that use case. I think it's going to require lots of organizations to fundamentally, rewire how they work. But that's going to take years. And that requires that deliberate sort of analysis, not panicking and just chucking technology at things, right?
Deliberate analysis and really hard multidisciplinary work,
Mm,
coming
mm,
up with shared meaning amongst different professionals that have entirely different worldviews. We suck at that in organizations. It is like a really, really challenging thing to get people to even let alone open enough time in their schedules to be able to do that, but to get people to be that open-minded and not fall into politics traps to be able to have those hard conversations. I mean,
yep.
like I know we're here talking about technology. There's no technology that can substitute that hard work. None.
Right. Right. And so, Darryl, we're kind of touching on classic sort of transformation, breaking down silos, stakeholder engagement. But also kind of looking outside our organizational boundaries here, aren't we?
Yeah, and these are not new
Yeah.
conversations. If there's a reason to believe that the failure of effective AI adoption has occurred so far, it's that we never had the conversation to get our organisations into a state where we could adapt to these things more effectively and more quickly. So we're still suffering from the same problems that we had before, and that's it, for me, it just keeps bringing up old conversations. So we talked about RPA just a little while ago. Now, every time I'd have a conversation with somebody around RPA, I would say, you've got two rules to follow. Don't automate a process when you should be integrating systems. And don't automate a bad process. It'll just
Mm.
let you do something wrong quicker. So have we fixed those problems? No, we haven't. We're just layering more technology over the top of it. And we're still not addressing one of the fundamental problems, which is around data management, data quality. So those things haven't gone away. And the latest, magic beans are not going to fix that. We still have to do the work.
Yeah, I think this phrase of AI amplifies what you already have. And if it's bad, well, it's going to get worse. So that if that means you have a mess of point solutions, you don't have good data, you don't understand where your golden sources of data are. Yeah, good luck trying to integrate some, whiz bang, new AI powered solution, because if your data's a mess, it's just not going to work. So yeah, I'm with you in that there's just some difficult foundational things that are multi-year and continue to need to be focused on. And I guess maybe the practical advice for here and now is, not to get too blown off course doing the things that feel right, just regardless of whether AI materializes or not, because there'll just be decent foundations for your organization. So I guess the trouble is it's hard at the moment, probably, isn't it, to kind of get heard on some of these sort of topics when everyone is just sort of being bombarded by the narrative that you're late,
Yeah.
and yeah,
Yeah,
Good
I don't think that's
technology,
anything
wait,
new either.
governance. It's
That's right.
a really challenging thing. Nobody wants to
Yeah.
talk about.
yeah,
No,
yeah,
that's right. Yeah, these are the hard things. So everybody, quite rightly, feels pressured, and so they look for the easy answer. And these are
yeah.
hard problems. We have to do the hard work.
So I'd like to shift us to like thinking about the medium to longer term future that we should be thinking about and like pausing to reflect on. And there's sort of, I think I've probably mentioned to you both this sort of cone of possibilities, right? That it feels like we need to prepare our organizations for. One is that this is the next blockchain, and the air entirely comes out of the balloon, and it becomes just a glorified, personal assistant, shall we say, like we talked about earlier. The other end of the extreme is no, actually, some of these worldview models that are being talked about do hit the market in 6 to 18 months or whenever they land, and fundamentally they actually understand the world like you or I do because they've been trained like a human baby, right? There's this, for those that haven't seen this, there's this theory that that large language models have been trained on X amount of data, but if you look at how a child learns, just the visual sensory data that they process is far more, it's like an order of magnitude more data that a child up to the age of, I can't remember the exact numbers. I'll put the link to the actual article in the notes. But it's something like, by the time that the child's a toddler, they've seen far more visual data, and from that they have worked out gravity, cause and effect, various different things like that. Now you can imagine if you have something that truly understands some of the fundamental concepts, then is linked to language. It's not sort of bluffing that it is a human. It actually fundamentally has some of the grounding of what it is to be a sensory feeling, touching, not feeling, sorry, but sort of experiencing visually at least. So it feels like the sort of adding the visual element to text will potentially be another breakthrough that may, and I guess what we have to then do is go, there may well be another whole hype cycle on top of the current one to go, oh my God, now this is just even more of a reason why you need to spend all your money over here. So that's not what I'm trying to get. I guess what I'm trying to say is we don't quite know where these things are going to go, but my suspicion is large language models will, hit a sort of peak. We shouldn't just be planning for those, though. This for me feels like it has unlocked a bunch of new thinking in lots of different industries, lots of different parts of the world. Because I've seen some really interesting things about how people are using more traditional AI models to do great stuff. But the reason they've got funding to do that is that the C-suite have had like their eyes open to the potential and power of AI, whereas before that was a harder conversation to have. So I do kind of feel like there is a wave of genuine value and transformation coming beyond what we've sort of seen, and it feels like to your points, like people should be sitting down, architects and program people thinking about the future of their organizations should be sort of doing some scenario planning and thinking about what are the things we need to watch for, what are those almost flags or trigger points that go, okay, we're now seeing the market mature, we're now seeing people really do agentic things that aren't just very trivial automations, that they are genuinely offering things like procurement. Because I think this is the thing for me is like I see this potentially being a channel, much like APIs were, much like mobile and e-commerce were. I eventually I see this being a channel, and I think I shared with you my piece I wrote in 2016. Like it feels like there's opportunities as consumers to have something that helps, you know, algorithmically help us manage our lives financially. And in order for that to become true, you would potentially have things that can do certain transactions on your behalf. Now, we're not there yet, but it does feel like this is a world that we should be like doing a little bit of what if planning for and going, if that is true, what does that mean for how we go to market? How our people? Yeah, so I appreciate this is a lot to unpack. So, but yeah, and I'll start digging out some of my thinking about what this means. But I guess yeah, what's your thinking on that sort of longer term planning, either of you?
Daryl, would you like to go first? Or would you like me to?
You can go first, Selena.
Okay. I I would love, this is what I would love, and then I'll kind of try to bring it back to reality a little bit. I would love if we flipped the script. What do we need to do as society to better our lot in life? What do we need to do, to address the climate horizons that we are
Hmm.
facing? What do we need to do to ensure flourishing of human and other species and biodiversity in on our planet? And let's commercialize those things. Let's use those frames to align incentives and align capital in ways that we haven't before. I think that the technology gives us that ability. I think that what is solely holding us up as humans being able to do that. And I worry that that with even the constructs around the banking stuff that you wrote, which is so smart and great and could be really, really powerful. If it's built on old extractive logic, it could exacerbate problems. And I think so what I think is very likely to happen, LLM bubble bursts. We realize that we're not going to be able to solve all the world's challenges with these LLMs. I kind of hope that it happens fast enough that the public gets really pissed off about the consequences of it, so that with this next wave of really cool technology gets the proper governance systems built around it. We need it. I mean, where we're at, like it's governance failures abound, and our logics are not fit for purpose, certainly not for this planet. So like, so to me, if we could like set up sort of and not set it up, but react in a way that can sort of take what I view as an inevitable bubble burst, translate that into really thoughtful and society aligned regulation for these next waves of AI, and get the priors. Like if we're teaching computers like babies, let's teach them that they have to do X, Y, and Z, and teach them that these are the things that we as a society have decided are non-negotiable. Because it is like there are very smart people are very worried about what these technologies will be able to do, especially if we build them in this old extractive capitalist logic, which looks at humans as like a resource versus like, the people to be served.
No, you're right. I'm glad you brought us back to that
Sorry,
because
that's like real
no,
big.
no, 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 no. I think you're right. I think because I do care deeply about those things. I guess I'm just sort of trying to sort of do the sort of futuring thing that says like, there's uncertainty here, and we need to look at one extreme. The other extreme is, we go into a world where there's a very small number of players that control intellectual capital, um, commerce flows, and so on and so forth, and inequality and so on is even more of a problem it is now. The reason I raise this sort of algorithmic thing, though, is I think we have algorithmic asymmetry, or very rapidly we will. I think we already do, actually. Look at how dynamic pricing is a thing for tickets, for airlines, for various things. Like, as a consumer, it feels like you are massively disadvantaged by the fact that there are companies selling you products using algorithms that, you're. It's hard as a human being to sort of, to play into that sort of marketplace. So that's why I'm quite keen on sort of trying to democratize some of this capability and think of a world where that is true, where it's not just big banks that have algorithmic trading. You have individuals that have access to some of these things. But let's part that and come back to that, because I think you have raised some really important foundational pieces here, which is that we have to be mindful and more efficient. Like this whole brute force model is driving craziness, right? Like this whole thing that we will just throw more compute and more energy and more buildings, more data centers, and more. It is very convenient for people that want to sell more stuff, and it's frustrating for someone who, like myself, who feels like we should just be engineering things better, not just technically, but to your point, Selena, thinking about the kind of the trade-offs we're making, the implications on sort of stakeholders. And I guess that, Darryl, where is your head on, like, is there a hopeful future here where actually we do get the organizations that we work for and with to see that there is some fundamentals that we just need to reset on in order to actually build sustainable, architectures and sustainable businesses? Because otherwise it feels like we're potentially just stuck in this trap of short-term thinking and extractive thinking.
Yeah, and I think that the answer is yes.
Mm,
There's absolutely a set of foundational principles that we could apply and build these types of organisations and this type of society that we're talking about. At the moment, the balance of power is not in their favour,
yeah.
so that's problematic. And so I think we need to understand what it would take to make that sort of change. But absolutely, we created this mess. It didn't exist a little bit more than a century ago. Society looked very different,
Mm.
and whilst there wasn't particularly one architect of the mess that we've created, they are conscious decisions, sometimes without consideration, and we've created a problem that we could otherwise have not created. So we have the ability to create something else, but we have to have the willpower to do that. And as I say, we have to be able to arrest the current sort of power discrepancy that exists. That's just feeding the monster,
Is
and
it is it is it is
that's
it
problematic.
also short-termism? I wonder whether things like social media and like doom scrolling and sort of clickbaiting has made us collectively all very short-term focused. Like if it's not grabbing your attention now, it's not a thing. It's like actually this longer term kind of slow thinking, fast thinking, and sort of longer term planning is almost sort of falling out of favor. And I think Agile pushed a lot of this. Was like, don't come up with a big plan or a big architecture or a big spec. Just get on with stuff. Just get stuff done. And I do worry we are slipping to a world where it's just like, yeah, just focus on doing something and don't worry about the consequences down the road.
Yeah, and it's easy to sort of just espouse those ideas as a theory that you feel like that is what you're seeing in the world. But there are actual studies that can back up those statements. And if you look at the work of people like Ian McGilchrist, who understands very well how the different hemispheres of the brain work and how we're feeding one side of the brain and neglecting the other. And it's the feedback loop that is creating the environment that we find ourselves in now. And as I say, we did this to ourselves. So we can undo it. And I would love some of these technologies in the way that they're being sold to us in terms of what they can do for us. But that's not what we're actually receiving. So we need to be better at making it do the things that we need to be able to create the sort of environment that Selena was talking about.
But Selena, doesn't this get incredibly political very rapidly and
Oh,
then
yes.
get very hard to, kind of get people to see eye to eye? Like, I feel like, and maybe this is a symptom of currently, it certainly feels like the world's pretty, split or becoming more polarized. Is there a way you think to sort of navigate this with policy and governance in a way that can get people to sort of come together or yeah, where's your head on that?
Ugh. Yes, I do, but I think it is going to take the will. I think that um, I feel like I'm going into a different talk rather than leaning on architecture, but I ultimately do think that architecture plays a huge role in this and what I'm about to say. I the polarization is by design. That is a piece of a
The
complex
playbook.
a playbook.
Hmm.
And you look at like the like recent events and people on different sides of the spectrum are getting two entirely different narratives about what is going on. So we don't have a shared reality. And we don't have in the US, certainly a government that is treating information with the due care and addressing the complexity that is required to move towards a better place. So I do think that it is very politically motivated. But I think that the power has to rest with the people and with what we demand of our governments because they're not our representative democracy in our country is clearly broken. Things are not working. We need to, regardless of political ideology, like it is something that can be addressed. But that is reorienting around care, around community, localities, the local movements are really beautiful. The idea that states can create environments that serve their communities here in the US is gaining like a ton of traction, and there's a lot of like state and mayor sort of collaborations that are going on that give a lot of positive signals. So I think it can be done, but I think it's really hard work, and I think it takes a civic duty on behalf of all the individuals involved.
And so then is it then down to individual architects and organizations to try and embody the things that they would like to see come true? I think the trouble is, are you just sort of fighting against the flood of everyone kind of going incredibly tech driven and capital? It just feels like you're sort of fighting against the tide. But then that's not unusual for enterprise architects. Enterprise architects, I think, have become, probably most of them have become comfortable with challenging the popular narratives, like, oh, agile was what I referenced earlier. Just get stuff done and don't think about the kind of wider architectural implications. And the project cult is another. Like, yeah, we just want to get this project over the line. Well, hang on, can we actually deliver something that's aligned with where we want to be going as an organization? So I guess there is some of that. I didn't want to make this overly political because I know this gets very divisive very rapidly, but I do think there is a degree of architects. I think most architects I've ever worked with care about the systems they create and the ongoing and the sort of implications of that. And so is it sort of leaning in? Is it sort of leaning into that and just sort of being that voice in the room that sometimes is annoying, and but we're there for a reason, and we're there to sort of provide those guide rails and challenge to things that otherwise people will just sleepwalk into.
Yeah. Well, and I yes, I think that architecture provides a policy framework, like to have an architecture-led policy framework that looks at the purpose of organizations and institutions, and actually what happened. The whole idea that the purpose of a system is what it does
Yeah.
is something that you can tie to from a policy perspective. So yes, architects lean in, like let's create civic architectures that can help society thrive. Let's look at our business organizations as responsible nodes and actors. And I mean, we created companies in the first place to serve a social good. I mean, that was the idea behind it. And over time, corporate law has contorted into a place and where we've gotten to with some major decisions where we have this whole idea of shareholder primacy. Really? Like the public doesn't have an interest in companies that are responsible. So like, yeah, our architects can figure out how these public-private partnerships that are driving so much of our economy work together to serve people and planet. I think there's so many opportunities for our profession to lead here and with AI all over the place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And architectural crafting, like a way, like to be able to like move things along in incremental ways that society can digest, you know?
Yeah. That
Darryl,
sounds
you were
good.
gonna. Yeah.
I'd probably add to that I think it's sort of indicative of what we're talking about here. That one of the reasons that architects are useful, I think, in organisations is because we provide decision support. So we are able to see holistic views of the organisation that allows better decisions to be made because more awareness is brought into the conversation. And one of the things that we use in that process are principles. And when you think about that word, the idea that we apply principles to decision making, it kind of spells out what we're talking about here, that we need to define better principles and we need to be able to have the conversations where those principles are applied in the decisions being made.
There is something
Yeah.
in my head though that's worrying, that like, is there a danger that if we're not careful, we get viewed as just being stuck in the past? And yeah, I mean, how do we mitigate against that, where like people are just like, yeah, we just need to do this. That's just it's yeah. What are your thoughts on not being made irrelevant by someone saying, oh, we don't need architecture anymore. We'll just have AI to make architecture decisions for us.
I think that would be so misguided. The AI that we have now doesn't have a stable view of
No.
a work organization. Architecture provides that. And what I view like architecture can provide that forward-looking view and actually define what progress means for an organization or a group or a society or whatever that happens to be. And that in and of itself is super helpful. I think that boards could use architectural services to orient their thinking more towards the future. Like there's like some surveys that like all boards know that they should be spending X amount of their time on future prospects, and yet they only spend like 20% of their time even thinking about those things.
Because they're
How are
firefighting
they
too
even
much.
making those decisions? They're
Yeah.
getting information from their self-serving executive team, served up to them. So how are they challenging what the future could look like and whether the organization is even capable of achieving the futures that
Mm.
they're saying they're going to? To me, it like kind of reorients what fiduciary duty should look like in smart ways. It uses technology, because like imagine if you can like have your architecture and you can have a conversation with your architecture to understand what the possibilities are and what the constraints are and have conversations based around that. I think those are the most useful conversations with all this change in the
Mm.
air.
Yeah, and whenever I get asked that question, Oliver, I just point towards Selena and ask her opinion on how governance can be an enabler, um, because she has fantastic ideas
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
changing that mindset about what governance is and how it can empower organisations, as opposed to being looked at as stuck in the past or the no place.
Yeah, I would love to sort of touch on that a little bit, because governance does feel like it's been sort of tarred with being a dirty word at times, right? I think there's a journey of enlightenment that you can go on with governance where you understand that it's actually, it helps rather than I think it just it's got a bad reputation, I think, in some quarters. Maybe that's in highly regulated businesses where they feel they're too constrained, but. Yeah, what's your take, Selena, on, I'm sure, yeah, you've got thoughts on governance as an enabler rather than yeah.
So many thoughts on that. So I think, and just to tie this back to the hype narrative, this
Yeah.
idea that regulation, and guardrails and governance just slows things down so much, like that is not based on reality. Bad governance certainly slows things down. The powers that be currently are not wrong that bureaucracy is pointed in so many wrong directions, and that entropy has, I mean, they probably haven't talked about entropy, but that it has set in so many different ways. So in the way that organizations practice it very defensively and with a frame of risk aversion at all costs, like there are different ways to mitigate risk that are not so bureaucratic and restrictive. And a lot of that happens at the design phase. So we don't even design governance. It's kind of something that happens when we get our organizational structure. And then we're like, okay, we need the heads of these places to be on a committee. And then we get together in this committee and we're expecting that team to operate as a unit and be able to really like solve really complex challenges when they spend no time on working on shared meaning or understanding like the purpose of the decisions that they're supposed to make, or whether that governance body is structured appropriately to be able to take the decisions that they say that they're taking. I mean, I've been on so many compliance and ethics, ran so many compliance and ethics committees, and I think like, wow, wouldn't it have been so much better to look at this from a capabilities perspective? Never even talked about, like architecture gives us so much to work with.
Provides the language and the structure, I suppose, to actually sort of operate. Yeah. Yeah.
The
There's a couple
language,
of,
and
yeah.
if we look at risk and opportunity at the same time, and we build conscientiously and ethically from the
Mm.
ground up, like it doesn't become restrictive. It becomes what Darryl says is a design principle that you operate by. And like if there's and you sense the consequences of what you're doing, not as like externalities, but as consequences that you either have to shift in response to or that you have to deal with and
Yeah.
remediate in some meaningful way. And then I think governance unlocks your innovation engine. It unlocks your ability to align your enterprise. It helps you develop that shared meaning that's going to allow change initiatives to actually be successful. But we skip that really, really important part of governance and meaning making amongst each other. And we all have our own worldviews that we operate in.
There's a couple of phrases I'd like to throw out here because I think they're relevant, which is one is give me the constraints of a tight brief. Or sorry, give me the freedom of a tight brief is one of them. The other one is that constraints drive innovation. And so I do think sometimes there is a, a, a missing role that guides organizations. But look, I'm conscious of time, and I wanted to throw in the fact that the next episode that's coming up, we're going to be speaking to the author of this book, which is yeah, Whatever Next by Lisa Woodall, and Wendy is going to join as well because Wendy Keen's also featured in this book. And Darryl, I see you have a copy. What? Yeah,
I do.
yeah, and I think it's very
It's
relevant.
just arrived today from the other side of the world, and
Very
I'm
good.
looking
So
forward to getting stuck into it.
you don't have a chance to have had a look at it much yet, but I think this talks very much to sort of this transformation leadership and how architecture can kind of be this force for sort of reimagining and reframing, and so yeah, I highly recommend it. But there's a bit of a plug for that. So look, I think we've just scratched the surface here. I'm sure we'll pick back up on this, but like to try and sort of wrap things up for folks that are perhaps a little bit experiencing existential angst, because I know I am, and I think many others are, right? Like, what sort of reassuring words, I suppose, would you give to counterparts out there that are just feeling a little bit battered, I suppose, by the hype and by the craziness?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, look, if you took anybody involved in the changes that are occurring now, whether it's the typical person on the street or the tech CEO, and you said, "What do you want to be in 10 years, in 20 years' time?" And the first thing they'll say is they want to be around and they want to be happy, and it's just trying to align those needs and take a breath and have the conversations that describe what that's going to be like, and then take action based on those discussions. Um, I know that that's not a particularly easy thing to do in the current business environment, and the tech industry is not designed to slow down and take a breath. But that would appear to be something that I think that we could benefit from.
My hope resides, I think so many of us are feeling this existential angst. And that in and of itself, I think, opens the door to considering new possibilities. And so I find a lot of hope from so many dedicated people who are doing really, really great work. I think about like the dark matter labs of the world. I think about, your presence in this space, Oliver, and Darryl, you working on human-centered design in such thoughtful ways. That gives me a lot of hope. And at least to me, it feels like like-minded folks are like across disciplines are starting to come together in new ways. And I think that that is going to unleash magical potential. And I think that people are going to be sick of feeling, I think we already are sick of feeling like so extracted from all the time and so inundated by our consumerism, and that we're craving more connection and community. And like, the US Surgeon General of the last administration like talks about this crisis of connection. And I think that and I think that there's a lot of good work trying to solve that. If we get there, that unleashes the potential for us to move forward in different and more thoughtful ways.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think it's easy at the moment to be sort of swept up by like the narratives that we're all consuming, and taking some time to sort of pause. I love both of those sort of reflections, and yeah, kind of reminding yourself what matters, like people and relationships. I think is often something I have to constantly, yeah, as a technologist. I do get a little bit overexcited sometimes by the tech, and it's easy to kind of be fueled by the narratives that we're consuming. And actually, I've deliberately been getting out of the LinkedIn bubble because I felt like I was spending way too much time being influenced by LinkedIn. So I've literally the last couple of weeks spent time at conferences. I was at Green IO, presenting, and also sort of taking in a lot of sessions there. And that was an amazing experience. And actually, the last episode of this podcast sorry, depending on when the episodes go out, another episode that's going out around sort of the same time as this one will be the one that's covering Green IO in London, but also just sort of AI conferences and technology vendors, just to sort of see what people are saying and pushing back, because there's lots of vendor narratives and then lots of pushback and challenge from the audience, which is great to see, so that you don't just feel like it's just you that's sort of feeling like the world is a little bit out of whack. So yeah, so I think there's definitely value in just sort of taking stock, and timing is a big thing as well. I think we're just in this sort of pressurized now FOMO sort of moment where I think you're both right. Like just taking a step back and going, hang on, what is really important, and uh, am I being overly influenced to act or sort of think it in a certain way?
Yeah.
Yeah, and as I said before, bring on the technology if it's going to enable us to have more time to be, a human being and share time with people that we enjoy spending time with. That's fine. Take the jobs away.
Yeah.
Give us the freedom to be something other than a machine in a factory, as we have been for the last 150 years or so.
Yeah, that's bang on as well, isn't it? I think this sort of human-centric approach. How can we reimagine things so that, yeah, we're putting people at the center of things rather than just perpetuating the industrial revolution sort of era of, mechanizing labor and all that sort of side of things. I think but it's challenging, isn't it, in a world which is so financially orientated, like to try and sort of reframe things. I think is increasingly for me. It feels, yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's just because I just feel like the world's being pulled in a certain direction, and it's like, do I just play into that now, or do I continue to sort of, fight against it? It's a challenging one, isn't it?
Fight against it.
Continue to
We
be a
must
human
we
being.
must keep up the hope because I think that the complexity of the situation that we're dealing with, I think
Mm,
that we're starting to kind of understand the broader patterns. I think that more and more people are starting to feel the effects of those larger destructive patterns. And so as this happens more and more, people's minds are going to start changing and we're going to start demanding different things, hopefully of our governments, of our institutions, including business, and of our healthcare and of our food supply, like the things that make such a huge difference in our lives. And so then we architect tomorrow as like minds expand, right? But as we go along, making changes like on that arc is critical. Like we need to, I call it architectural grafting. That's from an actual building architect who talks about using the base of old businesses and putting new ones on top, which I just love the concept. If we can do that over time, we'll incrementally be in such a better place and build the foundations for what is possible in the future.
I love that, Selena. I feel like that's close to where we should be, like being hopeful, optimistic, and trying to build a better. Is ultimately what this podcast is all about, right? Is like, yes, there's lots of complexity out there, there's lots of challenges, but our role in the world is to try and nudge and push things in a more hopeful direction. And so, look, I feel, as I say, I feel like we have just scratched the surface. So I'm going to twist your arms into coming on again to talk a little bit more about some of the rabbit holes that we didn't get a chance to perhaps go into on this one. But it's been a brilliant conversation. So thank you both for your time.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Oliver.
Ola.
Thanks, Daryl.
Appreciate it.